progress.
You said in response earlier to Mr. Swales that the risk stopping you delivering more benefits is the time it takes to train up the staff.
Well, that's one of the.
Indeed, that was one of the points you made. When did you first become aware of that risk?
Well, no, it's not. I mean, it's been there all along. I mean, it's a normal thing that, in terms of looking during the spending review as to what we could achieve in this period of how close we could get to producing a large amount of additional revenue, the build-up that we'd have to plan and go through to do that was obviously part of it. So it helped determine whether 7 billion was the right number.
So if it's been there all along, did you not have the money to start training people earlier? Or
no,
why
we had money, we did actually. The money comes and kicks in at the beginning of the spending review, but what we did do was take a look and say, what are the longest training times, and therefore criminal investigation. So we actually we made some money available. We identified some additional money
and when
within
was that first done?
To start before the spending review. So we started recruiting criminal investigators before the money coming through.
When was that?
That would have been the end of 2009, yeah, that's right, 2010.
2010.
Yeah, we'd have, yes, I guess.
Can I just ask
March last year.
How many did you recruit at that stage?
300.
On
If that's the case, why are there 8 initiatives reporting significantly reduced additional revenues compared to their year start position?
Sorry, I missed the start of that.
You were just saying how strong the position is on the change programme at the moment.
Yeah.
Why, if that's the case, are there currently 8 initiatives reporting significantly reduced additional revenues compared to their year start position?
Well, because one of the things governance does is it tells you if programmes are delivering or not. It doesn't necessarily guarantee everything works perfectly. What it does is it gives you the signals about change. I think one of the powerful things that was done even in this first programme is that on occasion a project has been looked at and despite the first original business case, it's been challenged and critiqued internally through the governance, and then changes have been made. In some cases we've increased the scope of programmes because of that, and in others we've increased it, and we've shared with you our risk register to sort of show you the nature of
absolutely, but I absolutely agree with that, but I would have thought the purpose of that risk register is then in order to drive action, but
yes.
This has been marked as high risk, as red, since last July.
Well, what you do with governance is you challenge, and so some of those things then get worked through into actions. Some of them lead to re-timetabling, some of them lead to changes of programmes. I mean, I haven't come along aiming to talk about every project in our new programme, but I think the governance does lead to decisions, not on everything every time they meet, but to prioritised action in the spaces where it needs it. And as I say, I think when MPA looked at that new governance, they gave it a very strong bill of health. I'm not at all saying it's perfect. I'm sure we'll have moments with you where you'll say, couldn't you have done better than that? The question the chairman asked me is, in a sense, are we being serious about this? And I think there's evidence we're building on what we're doing and getting better with each stage that we take. That isn't to say I think we're perfect or that there aren't more things we can do.
Stuart.
That we are as an employer.
Well, what's unclear in the answers, because it isn't about what you do as an employer, it's about what the law states.
Yes.
And whether the law was correctly interpreted, whether there was a gap in the law, or whether the law was varied in this case, and whether there was the scope to do that correctly. And what's unclear from your answer, you're talking about what we're going to do moving forward. What I'm unclear of, not the response as an employer, whether the tax law was correctly enforced by your official in this instance, or whether they interpreted in a way at variance with how it should have been enforced.
And when we sit in front of you, we don't feel it appropriate to take an individual's case and put it on the table and decipher it.
No. And therefore, Mr. Barclay might have said in parenthesis, this case or similar cases.
Absolutely.
Because we are
Exactly.
talking
It's
about
the policy.
principle.
It's
Which-
the policy we're trying to understand, the
which-
policy of interpretation of the legal
And
position.
I think our history has been to push back on these cases generally and regularly, and we have a history within compliance
push
and
back?
enforcement.
But you didn't.
Yeah, to prosecute people, to stop these cases, to make sure
Within the
that when
within
they
government
are being
and the civil service.
It's,
annually to talk about that.
Just a quick
Okay.
question. You just flagged the potential risk in that ministers don't see and cannot perform that assurance, and nor does Parliament, because Parliament doesn't see those individual cases. What lessons do you draw from the statement the Home Secretary made last month to Parliament, suggesting that in your previous role you went over and above what had been approved by ministers? Is there not a greater risk from a governance point of view in your current role?
Well, I don't believe the Home Secretary said I went over and above the activity of ministers. I think during the period I was in UK Border Agency, as the Chief Executive of an agency, I had a level of operational autonomy that it was important that I took responsibility for. I actually think one of the other scrutiny committees of Parliament, the Home Affairs Select Committee, put me to some task about whether or not I accepted responsibility at the time Charles Clarke lost his job for activity on the operational side of the job leading to political difficulties. So I think you sort of slightly have to remember that the responsibility was for an agency. I think what the Home Secretary's gone on to do is to take the view that she would prefer a different model.
Well, I've
I
got the
am
Home Secretary's
confident
statement here, and what it says, and you were the accounting officer, so you were responsible for the department concerned. It says the Vine report found that the border force had waived checks for other passenger groups over and above what had been approved by ministers. It talks about an initiative at Heathrow for which there was no ministerial authorisation, and it concludes by saying, which is not exactly a job reference, with a new chief executive and a plan for comprehensive change, I believe that UKBA is in better hands for the future. So it's actually linking this actually explicitly back to the chief executive. So I come back to the point, we're actually moving to a department where there's less oversight and more of a requirements on its leadership to stick to the governance that's in place. And yet we have a statement only last month from the Home Secretary, in essence accusing you of not doing that in your previous post.
I will say again, I don't believe the Home Secretary was accusing me personally of not keeping her informed. I think that I kept informed the ministers whilst I did that job, and I think some of the examples you've referred to were about the continued rollout of Secure ID in the latter stages of it. I gave evidence to John Vine, and I said to him that I had a view that Secure ID should have been a mandatory system, and I had occasion when I was the chief executive to take action if and when we discovered that the things we expected to be done were not done. I think that is how you hold me accountable.
But without wanting to preempt the Chair's speech to Policy Exchange, although to give it a plug for tomorrow, on the accountability of civil servants, if, as Lord O'Donnell said, only accounting officers can be held accountable by Parliament and that other civil servants can't, and we have a Home Secretary here saying actually key to the change is a change of chief executive from yourself, and that decisions were taken by officials in breach of ministerial authorisation, but you're saying actually I can't be held accountable to that, surely there is inherent in that a gap, because we can't hold the civil servants who breached ministerial authority accountable to Parliament. You've just ruled that out. And Lord O'Donnell, in essence, has ruled out, Lord O'Donnell has ruled out as holding the civil servants responsible as accountable to Parliament, and yet you've ruled out as holding you accountable as the accounting officer.
No, I didn't do that at all. I expected and was held to account in that job.
In what way?
I did 13 select committees, and I think I appeared in front of the PAC before your chairmanship, but on at least 3 occasions. I answered questions on the detail and the general strategy of the business, and I don't think I did ever either shirk those duties or fail to answer those questions. So I was perfectly happy to be held to account. The point I'm making is a different one, and that is during the time I was there, the politicians who were in charge of the Home Office at the time chose to have the agency run as an agency. It was a decision made after I took the first job. I had a framework under which I ran the agency, and I believe I kept people well informed of what we were doing. I don't believe I went outside ministerial authority during that time, and I am clear that if we moved away from ministerial authority, we should be held to account for that. Now, the Home Secretary has chosen to make some changes. I think I understand why, and I think that's entirely her gift.
Getting back to
You'll be getting rid of the deficit in no time.
Who's to say?
Steve, very
just a quick clarification on one of your earlier answers. Mr. Ealing, you were saying about things that would be artificial in terms of personal service contracts. Could you just give us examples of what would be artificial?
Well, I think it is essentially where really you're creating an intermediary between a real employer and an employee, and disguising that relationship. I think it's that sort
And the way of judging that would be length of service, would it? Or what would be
there's
the...
a variety of it's quite a complex area, and there's quite a lot of
Sure.
different things. They're all published. I mean, I can't recall them all. But
Can you send us a list?
Well, I'm sure we could, yes.
Yes,
I'm perfectly happy to provide.
We would just help in terms of explaining with constituents what are the criteria, and when we're looking
Yes.
at other organisations,
Well, yeah, I
whether
mean,
they
there are,
meet that
obviously we
criteria.
do use the certificates. I'm
Am
very
I an
happy to
employee?
send
There's
a
a,
note.
there's a checklist, isn't there?
Yeah.
Am
Yes.
I an
But that's why it
employee?
makes it puzzling
Yes.
trying to work out why some are being approved.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Thank you.